Hello, and welcome to the Northern Peacebuilders podcast, presented by me, Allan Leonard. This series has been produced by Shared Future News to highlight the work and efforts of those seeking to contribute to better community relations in Northern Ireland. Shared Future News provides information and personal stories on the topics of peacebuilding, reconciliation, and diversity to a Northern Ireland audience and beyond. In this episode of Northern Peacebuilders, we meet Dympna McGlade, a peacebuilder based in Northern Ireland, and learn about her journey into peacebuilding and her thoughts on the state of peacebuilding in society. Dympna discusses her personal background, her community development work in Belfast, the role of research in peacebuilding, the need for a new peace plan, and the importance of political will and community involvement in creating sustainable peace. Today, I'm with Dympna McGlade, who is a peacebuilder and based in Northern Ireland, who has been practicing peacebuilding for some decades now. And we'll explore how Dympna got involved in peacebuilding and what keeps her going. So you're very welcome.
Thank you.
So let's just start by going into your personal interest in your work. Kind of what really started your journey into peacebuilding?
Well, from birth, I was born into a family who were staunch Republicans, and in 1963, the Republicans called a ceasefire, and my parents decided that the violent route wasn't the way to go. And for me, that was the beginning of the first original peace process. At the same time, lots of things were happening around the world in terms of civil rights and social justice. So the Republican movement moved forward in a more intellectual way and political way to look at how they might work towards United Ireland through peaceful means. Likewise, the Communist Party were looking at it, trade unions, the residents' groups. There were lots of other different groups and individuals who came together. People who wouldn't necessarily agree with each other, but they came together in the interests of social justice and trying to achieve it through peaceful means. So when I was born, my father was on the run, and I didn't see him until I was 3 years old. Then whenever I started primary school, the conflict was starting to come into play.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got to secondary school, we were in full swing. And I left school in 1974 when things were really at an all-time bad place.
Where were you living at the time?
Well, I lived in an area called the Marrowbone, the Bone, just beside Ardoyne, but not Ardoyne. There's a difference of a street as you have in Belfast.
Can you describe the physical political geography of Marrowbone?
The Marrowbone was 5 streets of predominantly Catholic community. There was a little bit of mix, not much, and our neighbouring area was from Louisa Street onwards, Laurel Park. That was predominantly Protestant, and that was way before the conflict started. It was an area in North Belfast and old mill houses, so it was 2 up, 2 down, an outside toilet, no heating, just a coal fire. So it was poverty. You know, we brought up in poverty, which we didn't know everyone was in the same boat. That's the way life was for us. And I think that's one of the things that inspired my parents to fight for all, because we weren't the only ones in poverty. Our Protestant neighbours were in exactly the same boat. It further drove the family to fight for social justice for all. It wasn't just the Catholic community. Many people think the civil rights movement was just about the Catholic population. It wasn't. I was brought along to demonstrations. It was much more than just marches. You know, it was demonstrations about bread and butter issues around bus fares. There was the Thatcher the milk snatcher, when Margaret Thatcher stopped the milk for schools.
Well, how old were you at the time?
Well, I'd have been 11.
This obviously made an impression upon you going to these demonstrations.
Well, it wasn't just that. I mean, they were in the civil rights movement, and it meant that meetings were held in different houses. So when it was held in our house, we had everyone coming to us. So I was listening to conversations from across all kind of Catholic, Protestant, dissenter, Communist Party, trade unions. Without realising it, it was kind of sinking into my young brain, thankfully, and it was being taught by good, decent people that were fighting for a better life for all. So yeah, and demonstrating and being involved in community work and community relations work was inbuilt. It was part of my upbringing. So anywhere I went, I always got involved with voluntary work, and I worked in England and studied in England for a while and became involved in voluntary work there. So it was part and parcel of my DNA. Sure.
And you came back from England after your studies?
Yes. Yeah.
And then what did you do professionally? How you developed these skills and put them into practice as a professional?
Well, it was a little bit of a baptism of fire. My first job when I came back, I'd been away for a couple of years and I thought, things were bad. It was the early 80s.
Yeah.
I'll just do a bit of voluntary work and get the lay of the land and familiarise myself with how things are now. But a job came up in Divis Flat, which was really bad at the time. It was before redevelopment. It was through Belfast City Council. So I thought, well, they offered it to me on a part-time or a temporary basis. I thought I'll take that on for a little while. And when I went to work in Divis, it was complete and utter mayhem. But I worked there for 5 years with a wonderful mentor called Jerry Downs, who was the senior community worker and I was the assistant community worker. And, well, there was murder going on, there was feuds going on. It was really bad. It was lockdown. The army were on the roof of the tower, helicopters coming in and out, leaving in supplies. It was just complete mayhem. I worked there for 5 years and then I got community worker in charge in Ardoyne. And I thought, that's fine. I went to Ardoyne and I realised this was easy. Divis was the hardest place you could have been at that time. So I appreciated it, actually. I learned so much under such pressure and working with such good people and a good community. Once they learned to trust you in Divis, you were one of the community.
Yes.
And you were protected and looked after, and we did some great work, but again, I worked on the ground then for several years in different communities. I worked in Ardoyne and then Rathanraw and Antrim and Bonmore in Newton Abbey, all the easy areas. And then I worked for the Northern Health Trust at the time in Rathanraw and Antrim, and then for Bernardo's in Bonmore. So I worked there and always did the cross-community work as well, with would have been Rathcoole and Ballyduff and other areas. But knowing that you needed to work across the divide, and that I realised at a very early stage that unless you work across the divide, people are not united to come together to address poverty. So sectarianism creates poverty, and in order to influence that, you must become involved in policy. The job with the Community Relations Council came up as I came to the end of my contract with Bernardo's, and it was for the policy director with Community Relations Council. And I'd been working on the ground for 10 or 12 years, but always across community and interagency. So I was able to look at all three kind of angles and thought I can put my skills to use by working as in a policy setting, because I understand how policy works. I understand what's happening on the ground and can bring the reality and the evidence to policy and to the policymaker and make that connection and bring people along with me, because I'd been doing community development work and always worked on the basis that I was the community development worker and people in the area were the community workers, because I would be gone and they would be left and they need to develop their skills to be able to enhance their skills to make the place a better place to live. So I knew I could bring people along and influence policy, and I took the opportunity working with CRC, and that's what I did there. I created lots of different ways of engaging government with the community.
So let's discuss what you think a peace builder is with this podcast where we're exploring different dimensions of peace building. Do you think peace building is recognized as a profession, or what do you think about the vocation of peace building from your experience and what you've observed from other people you would recognize as peace builders?
I think it's one of the most thankless tasks you can do, and at times soul destroying. I think the the innovative work and the advances forward have been mostly achieved at ground level, and they've been able to advance so far. But again, I'm back to policy, because policy is either not implemented to support their work, or the policy that sits uh, is just undermined, and it has been by both government and sometimes the gatekeepers on the ground as well. But for me, being a peace builder has been different at different stages in my life. Working in communities, you're peace building when I was in the 80s at local level, to get people the confidence and the knowledge and the proper information and understanding to be able to engage fully and to be able to learn about others. In policy, it was slightly different again, because you were working with government and bringing people on board and trying to get the two to listen to each other and actually to follow through and implement policy to make that change happen. And then it's funders as well. And then now that I've taken early retirement, voluntary redundancy, I'm in a different place, and I have a responsibility to speak freely as an independent person who's not tied by an employer or a political party or religious organisation. I have a responsibility to speak up and speak out and speak the truth, which I find isn't happening nowadays. I think for others, for me, with peace building, there are three stages, if you like, or three areas where you have me and people like me who are independent and can be vocal. And I hope the work we're doing now is leading towards getting those people together in some kind of organised way so we can speak out, because at the moment nothing's being said, nothing's being challenged. I mean, you had the protocol riots, and no one came out and said that's an abuse of children. They're on the streets. They're at risk of being imprisoned or hurt. And it's damaging those communities. No one's challenging that we're now 25 years into the Good Friday Agreement and we have paramilitary groups. We're still talking about transformation. I think those days have gone. And unless it's challenged, it will continue on to be transformation. And no one's challenging that we're into the year where government had said all interfaces would be down, and none of them are. In fact, we have more. And no one's challenging the human rights and equality abuse in areas, interface areas, where young people are having our history imposed on them and their life skills cut short. They're writing on the wall as to who they are, where they can go and where they can't go, and controlling their areas. Then you have a middle group where I think that there's kind of two. There's a group that's older and has been around a long time, still working on the ground. But there's a missing group that people, I think, tend to overlook, who are critically important for me, who are the older young people, if you like. They're the youth service say 25-year-olds. That's the cutoff point. Apparently, that's when our body stops growing and you start aging. So those between 25 to 45, 55, maybe even Alan. But there's that age group that are critical. We'll talk about young people that are our next generation. We have a current generation. And you were asking about the prospects. What prospects are there for them? You know, 3-year funding, 1-year funding, being undermined on the ground, where maybe they aren't respected, perhaps the work they're doing on the ground, and others are getting funded where they're not. And I'm thinking of control groups on the ground. We keep hearing the same voices, and other people, the silently silenced, as they're referred to often, haven't the safety to speak up and speak out and do the work on the ground in those areas that need it most, in the single identity areas. We're in danger there if you don't have support for that group in the middle. We're still going to go round and round in circles, and it's less and less attractive. Why would you go for a job in the volunteering community sector that a fixed term, maybe hasn't got the pension, isn't well paid, when you could be getting into the private sector or into government? You know, it's not attractive, which is disappointing, because I mean, we were deemed as a world-class peace process, and I think we should have world-class peace builders out there saying, we're doing well here. This is what we've done. We can share this with you. We bring people like that in from other countries. We do have them here, but you don't hear from the same people, and usually people with a past, and not had its place, but I think it's gone. And I think that group that's working now will be the group that's going to be helping what we refer to as young people, the 25 and below. And if they don't, we'll not have peace builders. We were constantly told that the conflict lasted a long time and it's going to take a long time to get the peace. But if we don't have people there to see it through to the end,
Yes.
and the end isn't in sight yet.
Listening to you maybe think about your parents and others at that time who just did it. They just organized meetings and sessions and protested and agitated. And now in contemporary times, it feels there's a professionalization of some of this work, and with all of the pitfalls of funding, sustainability, training, and retention. And so in regards to this middle cohort of potential peace builders, I'm wondering if there's a way to break the cycle, shall I say, of the kind of the funding and the retention, if there are other imaginative ways of engaging with that cohort. To be more specific, I'm mindful of some of the public responses to the murder of Lyra McKay and others, the deaths that we've had post-ceasefire, political violence post-ceasefire, but haven't quite figured out how to galvanize and bring more pressure on the politicians.
The answer to that for me is people my age, that are retired. I don't have a mortgage. I've nothing to lose. I'm prepared to speak out, and I think it's time to actually say the hard things that people who are employed or working for government can't. I think politicians, we've gone down the road of sectarianism in a sense of voting. Whilst you keep communities separate, you'll get the two main leading parties getting their vote. Whenever you start to have them integrated and you start dismantling the legacy of division, then people start thinking differently, and that's evidenced in private sector housing, for example, where young Catholics to East Belfast who would never have thought of that before. And there's a movement around where they're buying, it's cheaper, and they want something different. So who's going to speak on their behalf, and who's going to speak on everyone else's behalf if you're at risk of being silently silenced, if you live in a single identity community, if you are at risk of losing your funding, if you're at risk of being rubbished? I think there's enough people here like me who can come together with evidence, knowledge, research, and have a standing in their past work, who can speak up and out, and who are prepared to. That's my next goal, is to have a body of people who can come out whenever something happens, like Lyra McKay, to actually say, what are the politicians actually doing about paramilitarism? Right. I've read the last report of the disbandment on paramilitary groups. I know some of it was very good, but it's still talking about transformation. So who's going to challenge that? Politicians aren't. And it takes its course. And the governments aren't. They're still trying to keep everyone on board. So it's going to take a different body of people. Personally, I think older people and students should be the revolutionaries because they're both not dependent on anyone at this current time.
You mentioned research, and that's something I'd like to explore, is the relationship between practitioners and academics in the research, because I know you do cite research. And so what are your thoughts about the role that independent research can have, not only in providing evidence, but also then in trying to have evidence-led decisions and actions by politicians and other decision makers? What's your thoughts about that relationship?
Well, I mean, there's shelves full of research, excellent, really good quality, well evidenced, and research with brilliant recommendations, most of which say the same. Same research is constantly done, on interfaces, on shared space, on housing. and they say the same thing. And research is brilliant, and it's great for the like me to be able to quote it. You know, 91% of our schools are still segregated, etc., etc. So you look and you think, well, why did we fund it if we're not going to act on it? I remember looking at the amount of research was done on shared space. The European Union was very keen at one stage on looking at shared space. And Queen's did it, Ulster University did it, Independence did it. And they were all saying the same thing. Millions was spent on this research, and it was great. And the bottom line was it came down to say what people want is something they need. They want security if it was in areas where they're at risk. They would need to be engaged. They need, etc. This is how it all works. And we went and we explored all over the world. Canada was one of them, and Holland. Brilliant examples came from there. How it worked, why it worked, the success, what you need to do. But it was just shelved. So research is brilliant, and it gives you something to argue about. But unless it actually goes somewhere, and that somewhere is into policy, but it hasn't. This is what the problem has been.
So you would argue that there's sufficient research to provide enough material to confidently go forward as best as one can with any plan, that we're not creating something from scratch. If we wanted to actually develop into any of these areas like housing, quality, etc., that there's enough research that's been done here using best cases elsewhere to allow politicians, decision makers to actually proceed.
Well, yes and no. Yes, there's loads of information, good quality that can be built upon. And the no is that 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement, we are a different society. We're a multicultural society. We're a region of minorities. The LGBT community, disability, everyone else, marginalised groups want their say as well, and they're entitled to their say. So we can build on, and it's a great opportunity, I think, to bring people together, to re-energise the peace process, to say, what sort of society are we looking for now? We are different from 25 years ago. So the research that's been done to date has been very much focused on the two main communities, which is fine, and it was necessary. We look different now, and we need to not set aside the two main communities. We still have to address legacy issues, but we need now to look at it through the lens of a changed society. And also, I don't think we've listened enough to young people who want different. And like I said before, I don't think young people should have to live with our legacy. You know, if they want the walls down and they want to live and be educated wherever they want, we have a responsibility to provide that. So yes, it's excellent research and we can build upon, but I'd love to see it been brought into today's society and just built upon it, but not to be used as a tool to do nothing.
I'm going to let you elaborate a little bit about your proposed peace plan that you've mentioned in your current role at the Hume Foundation. You had said about making a peace plan that can be put in everyday language to motivate and excite the more general population. What do you think it might look like, and how could it possibly happen?
Well, I think what we're missing at the moment, the key thing for a new peace plan is a vision. We need a new vision for the new society. We need a peace plan that actually means something to people, that will inspire them to want to go in and make that change, that will recognise the work they do and show the world. I think we need to be more international. Show the world what we're doing and learn from other countries emerging from conflict that have lessons for us to learn from. So that's one part of it. I think the other part of it is we need for funders. I don't think the funding that has been available in the past, it's never going to be available again. But the funding that has been put in cannot be lost, cannot be undermined. And I think the funders need to come back, and the governments, America, the European Union, the Republic of Ireland, the British, need to come back and say, we've invested here. It's not all about money, but it's making sure that investment was worth it. And they do have a responsibility to come back and ensure that the peace process is pushed forward. It isn't all about money. So that's part of the peace. So I think they need to bring pressure to bear on the local politicians here to actually come up with the goods. I mean, the goalposts are set back further and further every time. with all the different agreements since the Good Friday Agreement. Peace has never actually been that big a focus. You know, we've had a variety of different names for it. Something as ludicrous as CSI, the shared future, we have the Together Building a United Community. Why was it never just called a peace plan? I mean, it's all softening and fudging.
You made the comment that so much so far seems to come across more as community and economic development rather than peace and reconciliation.
Yeah. Well, when you listen to youth workers, for example, they talk about the brilliant work they do with young people, and young people do want something different and they're inspired by it and they want change. And then many of them go back to single identity areas and single identity schools. It needs to change. Is that community relations work? I don't think so. I think the days of single identity are over, to be honest, in most areas.
The argument is made about single identity work that some communities are less confident or still need more work to transform. And you yourself have said transform into what? And perhaps the what hasn't been articulated well enough by political and civic leadership. And so my question about your peace plan was then, what could be the language and who would deliver the language of a peace plan to change the landscape so people feel less about going back and having their vision only within their immediate community, but not actually in their minds thinking about how this is serving wider society?
See, I have worked with people here for a lifetime, and I'm convinced the majority of people here want peace. And all the research shows when you ask people, would you like integrated education? Yes, majority. Would you like shared housing? Yes. Would you like flags down? Yes. And so on. And the caveat is in the right condition. And part of the right condition that is sidelined quite a bit is safety. And if you look, we talk about sectarianism, I look at segregation. Because if you go into an area like Rathcoole or Ardoyne, there isn't sectarianism at local level. It's paramilitarism. So what's all that about? It's nothing to do with the border issues or anything else. If you take Rathcoole, the people are more concerned about the UVF being on one end of Rathcoole and the UDA being on the other than they are about the people in Baltimore. Because there's no sectarian incidents anymore. Very rare. I don't know when the last one was, but there's lots of incidents and drug dealing and everything else going on in that area and oppressing their own people. So the majority of people there want change, but they don't have a voice. And I think that human rights violation, that people can't have a voice. And back to the research, it shows people want change, whether asked anonymously. So I don't think there's a huge issue about local people. I think what needs to be done is that they're given the conditions where they can speak, they're given the encouragement to look for a vision for the future, and they're given the resources to make change. And I think you would see it in a very short space of time. The will needs to be there, and the threat needs to be taken away, and the opportunities need to be opened up.
Dympna, what do you think needs to happen in order to change the system that perpetuates some of this perpetual violence in some neighborhoods in order for those residents to be able to speak up and make change? The onus not only on them, but on the rest of us.
Well, first and foremost, I think there needs to be the political will. Secondly, I think there needs to be pressure applied to that political will, and it needs to be carefully monitored, encouraged, supported, and challenged when it needs to be. And I say that because the current T-Buck strategy is undermined constantly by the very people who put it together. I've known of incidents where There's been flags put up outside shared neighbourhoods, and a political party hasn't supported the residents and made them feel safe by saying it was wrong, made excuses. Oh, well, you live near a certain area, you can expect that. There have been other incidents in shared housing where a local politician, for the sake of their party, turn up with a golden key with the T-Buck shared neighbourhood sign above them saying housing for nationalist community, because that's our votes. There's lots of examples where they're undermining their own policy. So there needs to be a challenge there from lots of different quarters. I think people on the ground, if you walked up to them in the street and said, well, what do you think of peace process and how's it impacted on you? They wouldn't know, and they don't get information. I'm going through a process working with Holywell Trust, who's doing this democrative or deliberative polling kind of process. It's a pilot. And when people get the information, you bring the people into the room and you say, here's the reality. This is the fact. These are the facts. And if you stay where you are, this might happen. If you move ahead, here's opportunities. And you often find when people listen to each other, get the proper facts, give them the opportunity to speak and give their point of view, they're very pragmatic and they come up with the right answers. So more of that in the areas. But key is in a safe environment. If I were living somewhere that was controlled by the boys, I wouldn't be speaking. Who's there to protect me? I think also there needs to be another refocus on policing. I come from North Belfast, from a nationalist area. I know when I go into it, there isn't the policing you would expect for the reform that went through, and 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement, and where there's political agreement and support for it. I mean, police come in tentatively. They're not welcome. They're not understood. The bridges haven't been built. And I think people have a right to expect policing service like any other region. And I think the understanding between the police and the community, there hasn't been attention to build that properly. People have been told, first of all, don't trust the police. And then secondly, the police are in, trust them. That building of relationships hasn't actually happened. And if it's not addressed, we'll continue on as we are with that lack of trust. Police, it has changed, but people don't have that information, not given the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So they depend on local policing. That has to stop. And I think the peace builders on the ground, they also need to be there to help make it happen. We need to refocus to say it isn't all about funding, but you do need resource, professional people and people to actually do the job. And we need to be realistic about who's getting funding, what impact they've made, should they continue to be funded, and where are the gaps? Who hasn't had the peace dividend? And it's very evident who hasn't had it. And if we're pouring money into the same things, we'll get the same results. So lots of different approaches to it, but it's all achievable. It's all achievable. But the bottom line is it takes political will. And the political will here is hard to get. And it also then takes the encouragement and the challenge from outside. And I think we particularly rely on our international supporters for the peace to help us with that. And the grey hairs as well. And the students.
Well, thank you very much, Dympna, for providing some very concrete and specific proposals to how peace builders can continue to contribute to transforming our society. But ultimately, the need for politicians to collectively do their part as well.
I would like to add just where I talked about human rights and equality. In the 80s, myself and 4 colleagues took a religious discrimination case against Belfast City Council and won. Now, the reason I'm particularly proud of that is that it followed in the footsteps of civil rights. It was something civil rights achieved to address discrimination in the workplace. But it was also at a time when violence was still rife. and we chose to go a legal route, and it changed things, whereas violence continued on and changed nothing. Well, changed for the worse for some people, but it changed things legally. 5 of us changed the whole approach to fair employment and discrimination, and that's the way to go. The legal route, the peaceful route.
So it's another avenue to change the system.
It is. It should be used. People fought long and hard for human rights and equality, and it goes across the board for all. And we now have a mixed community in terms of multiculturalism, so we need to keep continuing on down that road to make sure everyone's protected.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Northern Peacebuilders is produced by Shared Future News. Our staff include Allan Leonard, Alan Mabin, and Julia Paul. The theme song is The Trouble's Never Over, with thanks to Scott Anderson. This and other episodes with notes are available at our website, sharedfuture.news. If you would like to suggest someone for a future episode of Northern Peacebuilders, please email us at admin@sharedfuture.news. Thanks for listening.